and good morning and a really warm welcome from my colleagues and I at Hargreaves Lansdown. Thank you for joining us, and it's a pleasure to see all of you. So yeah, looking at the registration numbers, I think most people have joined, so yeah, let's get going. A few housekeeping points. I just wanted to let you know the session today is being recorded, so we can certainly share a recording with you afterwards if you'd like to have that. There's also a Q&A box, so feel free to enter your questions in there as we go along, and we'll have a time at the end to answer any questions and go through those with you. I'm Katie Hooper, so I head up our workplace retirement service at HL. And the aim of the session today is to provide you with an overview on retirement resilience and why it matters really more than ever. We've obviously got the high interest rates and inflation, rising energy costs, causing a lot of volatility in financial markets. And sadly, those that suffer most are the people nearest retirement. So I'm joined today by our experts. We've got Sarah, Helen, and Claire, who are going to explore the ways that you as employers can support your employees who are thinking about retiring during these times of uncertainty. So first of all, a little bit about Sarah. Sarah is our personal finance analyst at HL, and Sarah is going to talk about the impact of the cost of living crisis and how it's impacting your employees and the pressure that they're under. She's also going to talk about some of the rises that we've seen in this crisis, sensible steps people are taking in the light of the prices going up, and also the actions people are having to take, which then unfortunately are going to build problems for the future. We'll then hand over to Claire. Claire is our workplace financial wellbeing analyst, and Claire is going to speak about the importance and value of financial education to ensure members are equipped with the knowledge to make informed decisions at retirement and don't sleepwalk into the wrong decision. Claire will explain how members can become financially resilient in both the accumulation and the decumulation stage, and this is by support via their employer. She'll also cover off the reality of saving for retirees and also some insight into what we're hearing from our pension scheme members at the moment. And once Claire's finished, we'll hand over to Helen, and Helen is our senior pension analyst at HL. Helen is going to cover the current challenges retirees face and how retirement is such a personal decision and how everyone's circumstances can really be very different. Helen will also look at how employers can help their members and ensure they have the support they need at retirement, because employers really do have a key part to play, and actually they're the people that retirees do trust most. Finally, Helen will finish off with the support that is available to members, how it's important not to forget about other pots that have been built up with previous employers. So with that, I'll hand over to Sarah and enjoy the session.
Hi, it's a perfect timing. I think you can probably hear the scrap metal collector outside trying to drum up business. So sorry about that. But yeah, so as Katie said, I'm a personal finance analyst at Hargreaves Lansdown. And I'm going to sort of take you through a lot of what I'm going to tell you is very, very depressing, I have to warn you. So I'll do it as fast as possible and so with minimal depression. But if I can move to the next slide. So it really the sort of the purpose of what I want to take you through is really looking at rising prices, looking at the impact it's having on our finances. I'll introduce you a bit to the HL Savings and Resilience Barometer, which is how we measure how people are doing at the moment. We've got some results from that, and we've also got a forecast from for July next year, looking at how people's finances will be faring by that point. As Katie said, we've done some research into the steps people are taking in order to manage the crisis, and some of that is building them some problems for the future. So, as I say, very cheery stuff. So if I go to the first slide, so I don't think anybody is going to come as a huge shock to anyone that prices are rising, but it's particularly notable that the essentials are getting more expensive. So we know that the overall inflation rate is 10.1% at the moment. The Bank of England expects that to peak at around 11%, so the pain's not over yet. Then we've got food inflation, which is 14.5%, electricity price inflation, which is up by half in a year, and gas price inflation. Looking at the gas price, I think is one of the most striking things because it's almost doubled since this time last year. So there's some really hair-raising prices there. If you go to the next slide. I'll keep going while we go to the next slide. So I've got some prices here of rises in the supermarket, and I wanted to draw attention to this because food and drink is one of those areas where we've got very, very used to prices dropping, and what's happened during this crisis is they have massively ramped up. And ever since higher inflation kicked in, it's one of those things that people have really mentioned when they're interviewed about what pressures they're particularly under. So 95% of people say that their food bill has risen. We know that the food rate, so the rate of price inflation of food has accelerated for the past 14 months, and we're now at a 14-year high. So these are really, really hitting people hard. And we also know that the lower your income, the more you tend to spend in the large proportion of your income you will spend at the supermarket, so the more trouble you're going to have making ends meet. But it is, it's something that does affect us also. It's worth knowing that these price rises are really putting the pinch on people. If we move to the next slide, I mentioned energy earlier, and energy bills have seen some really horrendous rises. So this, I don't know if you remember, we were sort of freaked out enough about it in April this year when the energy price cap went up by about £700 to 1971. In October, that went up again. So the price guarantee capped that for the average user at about £2,500. We've also got these universal lump sum payments, which will take another £400 off. But even, taking those two things together, we're still paying more in October than we were before. And then the really hideous bit is that we know that this will only last until April. We don't know what support will be in place, although while the government said that there'll be help for those who need it most, we don't know whether that will stretch the average earner. And that estimated price cap there's lots of different numbers being bandied around, but it looks like it could be as much as twice as high as it was in April. So that's really going to take a toll on people's finances. So if we can move to the next slide. So we know that people are already struggling with their bills. So 7.8 million people say that bills are a heavy burden, and that number has actually gone up. So it's gone up 2.5 million people in 2 years. So that's a huge rise in the number of people who are really struggling with their bills. Then the ONS measured whether people are struggling with energy bills, whether they're struggling with the rent or the mortgage, and whether they were behind with payments. And they found that 45% say it's hard to afford energy bills and 30% finding it hard to afford the rent or the mortgage. So there's some really, really big numbers about people who are struggling already. The lower your income, the more likely you are to struggle. So more than half of those with an income under £20,000 found it hard to pay energy bills. Renters also find it difficult. So that's 60% of renters found it difficult to pay the energy bill, and 39% struggled with the rent. And as a result, we know that people have been sort of trying to make these ends meet, trying to heat all these bills, and their finances have really suffered. So they've had a real knock to their resilience. So if we can move to the next slide. So what we do is one of the things I do is I look at a lot of these figures that come out around the financial problems people are facing. And there's something about when you see so many figures that are so terrifying, it starts to just feel like the expected. So it's worth noting that actually these are horrendous figures, and that these are really, people are facing huge problems. So whilst we get very used to hearing about them in the press, it doesn't take away from the fact that people are really feeling it. So we know that 79% are very or somewhat worried about cost of living. 4.2 million have missed bills or loan payments in at least 3 of the previous 6 months. 16 million people have cut back on food and essentials. And when you look at people who are on lower incomes, that's around half of those who are earning between £10,000 and £15,000 have specifically cut back on food, as have half of renters. Now, that might mean trading down to own brands and budget brands, which we've seen the Kantar figures out this week showed that there's been a huge rise in those things. But it may also be people who just can't afford to feed the family the way they did. And we know that of those who can borrow, a lot of them are. So that's 1 in 5 using more credit than they did a year ago. And the FCA kind of looks at the number of people. They look at the people in financial difficulty as one of their key measures of how we're doing. And they found that 1 in 4 are either in financial difficulty now or just one small shock away from it. So that's a really massive trend. So if we can go to the next slide. So we look at how people are faring ourselves. So we have the HL Savings and Resilience Barometer, and that's something that we put together with the boffins at Oxford Economics. And they take a huge number of different measures of our financial resilience, and they sort of add them together and they work out where we stand. They measure it in relation to things like our debt position, our pension position, our investment position, whether we have enough savings, whether we have enough cash left at the end of the month. And so they put all these things together to sort of give us an overall picture. So if we look at the surplus cash position, so sorry, I'm losing my place slightly. So only half of people have enough money left over at the end of the month. Now, an awful lot of that will depend on your income. So unsurprisingly, the lower your income, then the more likely you are to be in this position. But we actually we break it down into quintiles. So that's the sort of the top fifth of earners and the next fifth and the next fifth. So we take that middle fifth, that third fifth of earners, and only 40% of them have enough money to be resilient. Other groups that don't have enough surplus cash include younger people, so that's 24% of Generation Z, and renters, that's 40% of renters. We also measured parents and non-parents. We discovered that parents are less likely to have cash left at the end of the month, which I don't think comes as a surprise to any parents. Then we sort of look at whether people have enough emergency savings. And emergency savings is, we've got a sort of basic rule of thumb that you should have at least 3 months worth of essential expenses in an emergency savings account. We know that overall 62% of people do, but this falls away with earnings. So again, we take that middle quintile of earners, and 56% of those average earners have enough in their savings. And again, renters and young people are far worse off. So only a third of Gen Z have enough savings, and 42% of renters do. The barometer also looks at pension savings, which I know Claire will touch on later, but it does follow a very similar pattern. The only one that really bucks the trend is debt. And it's worth knowing this because those on higher incomes tend to have more debt. They have it more as a percentage of their income too, and they have more of it on variable rates, which makes them actually much less resilient than people in other income groups when it comes to debt. Now, it may well be because they have the higher income, they feel that they have this support, so they can afford to take on a bit more risk. But of course, with life being more uncertain, with prices going up across the board for everybody, actually already they're starting to feel they've taken on more debt than is sensible. So we measure what their subjective view of their position is, and higher earners are a bit more worried about their debts than everybody else. So I think debt is a problem for, it's not something that we tend to associate with higher earners, but it is worth knowing this is a problem for them. Now, when we look at the figures for July, they look bad enough, but when we cast forward to next July, so we actually do a forecast for where we're going to be next summer, the findings are even more worrying. So if we go to the next slide. So in terms of savings, overall, the proportion with enough savings will drop from 63% to 57%. But again, we look at that middle quintile, it's going to fall below 50%, so from 56 to 48. So it means that at that point, fewer than half of average earners are going to have enough savings in order to be resilient. Among Gen Z, it's even worse, it falls to about a quarter. Renters, it's about a third, and single parents, it's about 1 in 5. So there's obviously a real problem with having enough savings, but it's surplus cash where the problems really come up. So we've got overall just 12% will have enough cash left at the end of the month. So that falls. So if you look at the bottom 2 quintiles, so that's the lowest 2/5 of earners. So within those bottom 2 quintiles, only 1% are going to have enough money at the end of the month. And it's 3% for average earners. That goes to 4% for renters, less than 1% of Gen Z, and only 7% of millennials. And it's really worth pointing out that not having enough cash left at the end of the month by this stage is not going to be the exception to the rule. It's going to be a really major problem right across the board. So if we can move to the next slide. So we do a separate piece of research. We ask 2,000 people about their life in general when it comes to money. We asked them in September, and very specifically, we asked them about the steps that they're taking in order to make ends meet. And we had a lot of the sensible steps. I won't read out everything that's on the screen here, but you'll notice everybody's sort of working on both sides of the equation. So there's sort of cutting in spending. So non-essentials, obviously around a third, essentials about a quarter, but also looking at the other side. So there are a significant chunk of people who are also looking at working overtime, asking for a pay rise, or looking elsewhere in order to take a job alongside their job in order to sort of try and balance the books. If we go to the next slide, we also see, unfortunately, that a lot of people are borrowing. Again, I won't run through all the figures on here, but there's some really significant. 1 in 10 people have borrowed more, and particularly they're borrowing from family and friends. The thing to note here that is a couple of these things are really high interest rates. So credit cards can often come with really high rates. Obviously, store cards really do. So one of the problems that you have is when people borrow to make ends meet, they think that they're sort of solving the problem in the short term, but actually in the long term, they're adding to the problem, because not only do you then have to pay all your bills, but then you've got to pay off your debts and pay the interest on your debt. So it becomes a sort of much bigger problem the more you borrow. So if you go to the next slide, we're also seeing people building up problems for the future. Now, a lot of this is around savings in particular. So we've got these large groups of people who are paying less into their savings, who are spending their savings, and who are stopping saving. Now, the big problem with those things is that obviously we know we're not at the end of the tunnel in terms of the cost of living crisis, and the Bank of England isn't expecting things to be over until really the end of 2024. So if people are already getting through their savings and not building up any more, then when things get worse, they really will have nothing left to fall back on. We also looked a little bit at investment. So there's a couple of figures here relating to paying less into investments and stopping investments. Now, these figures look quite low, but it is worth noting that amongst this group, a much, much smaller proportion of them actually invest at all. So it's only around a third of them invest. So as a proportion of those particular investors, it's a more significant group that are sort of looking at cutting back there. And then obviously we've got pensions, so 3% stop paying into a pension and 4% are paying less into a pension. And obviously this is, you know, one of the things that's really worrying about people building up problems for the future, because they might think that they're taking a short break now, but it is very difficult once you get used to the extra cash and once your prices rise again, finding that space in order to restart your pension contributions, and then you're then going to have long-term implications for your retirement. So as I said, as fast as humanly possible, in order to get all the depression out of the way before we get on with the really useful business of solving it. So I'll pass you back to Katie.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was a really, really useful insight into the challenges employees are facing at the moment. With that, I'll hand over to Claire, and thank you very much, Sarah.
Thanks, Katie. Morning, everyone. So Sarah's done a great, if slightly gloomy, job of painting the nationwide picture of financial resilience. So I'm going to start with elaborating a little bit more on how HL view financial well-being at an individual basis. Sorry, Katie. Yeah, that's the right slide. And then I'll share some insight as to what we're hearing from our pension members in this tough economic climate. More people are saving into a workplace pension than ever before, but we're witnessing an increasing expectations versus reality gap amongst pension members. So we'll explore that as well. And then last but not least, then we'll look into how financial education during both the accumulation and decumulation phases of the pension lifespan can help members make money go further and ensuring that they retire on their own terms. So at HL, we really do believe that knowledge is power. So it's key to individuals managing their money well. And for people who can't or won't pay for financial advice, they do need access to expertise and tools in order to make that money work as hard as they do. And that's exactly why we created 5 to Thrive. So democratizing our financial advice division into educational resources. So it's a holistic framework that aims to boost financial resilience regardless of age, background, occupation, or financial expertise. And it can be referred back to over the course of a lifetime to provide a steer, including someone approaching retirement. So 5 to Thrive provides a blueprint for informational delivery, and the HL Savings and Resilience Barometer, which Sarah introduced, measures the nationwide resilience across these 5 pillars. So it is all one big project. And there are 5 building blocks on the road to resilience. So control your debt, protect your family, save a penny for a rainy day, plan for later life, and invest to make more of your money. And broadly, we can split those pillars into 2 sections. So protect your family and save a penny for a rainy day. They are ways to reduce risk. So that's both everyday risk and the tragic, disastrous risk that we'd all very much like to avoid. And then those remaining 3 pillars, control your debt, plan for later life, and invest to make more of your money, are all about building a better financial future. So if we approach this from the perspective of someone age 50 and starting to think about their retirement, or an individual perhaps a few years from retirement, pillar 1, control your debt, you would interpret that perhaps as what do you need to spend before retirement to have more financial freedom or to make your retirement income go further. For example, will you have paid off your mortgage, or do you plan to do any renovations prior to retirement? If we're looking at the emergency fund, Sarah just mentioned that the recommendation is generally 3 to 6 months worth of essential expenditure, but actually once you leave employment, then it increases to 1 to 3 years worth of essential expenditure. Looking at planning for later life, that's less about building your pension, but more about the transition from employment, where you've had a regular income, to retirement and understanding the different withdrawal mechanisms. And pillar 5, investing, would be interpreted as switching from investing for growth, perhaps to investing for income. Our research did identify that people too often are looking at aspects of their financial resilience in isolation, and that means that they're unaware of the vulnerabilities. So an example would be a 55-year-old with no debt, but also no rainy day savings. If they're hit with a significant unexpected expense, they might consider accessing a portion of their tax-free cash, which could then impact their retirement outlook. So a holistic view of financial wellbeing is really fundamental to continued financial resilience. Next slide, please, Katie. As the current cost of living crisis, as we just heard, poses both an immediate threat to our financial health and wellbeing, but also will have long-term financial implications for many. And it's likely going to leave fewer savers on track for a decent retirement. So Sarah just shared some pretty scary statistics, and a significant proportion of people are taking on debt just to stand still. So it's unsurprising that our financial wellbeing team are hearing from over 55s in meetings that they are having to delay their retirement due to affordability. So with record high inflation, our money simply isn't going as far. So those on a fixed budget are struggling to keep up with escalating costs. It's compounded by stock market volatility, which is presenting further challenges and causing anxiety for all pension members, but particularly those approaching retirement or in retirement. Stock markets are, of course, informed by the health of the economy as well as unexpected events. So the pandemic and now cost of living crisis, and that's highly likely that the majority of pension members have seen their pension value depreciate considerably. And that's significant for the general well-being of members. We know that money worries cause anxiety, and research shows that the emotional pain of an investment loss is twice as powerful as the feeling of making a gain. And the DWP have recently reported that auto-enrolment opt-out rates have risen from 7.6% in January 2020 to 10.4% this August. So in this climate, there will undoubtedly be some trade-offs, whether it be that one person has to raise their house deposit to meet rising costs, another might have to reduce their pension contributions or opt out, needing to divert that money to rising utility bills. Next slide, please. Many of us do dream of traveling the world or relocating to the seaside in retirement, but for the majority, that is going to remain a pipe dream. So as a nation, we're simply not saving enough into pensions. So the barometer exposed that just 4 in 10 people are on track to achieve a moderate retirement. And a moderate retirement, as defined by the Pension and Savings Lifetime Savings Association, for a single person is about £21,000 expenditure a year, which would equate to about £47 a week for a food shop, 2 weeks holiday in Europe, and 1 weekend staycation annually. What's really interesting is through the barometer, we can actually apply the lens to different segments of the UK population and compare. So if we delve deeper in terms of income, it does increase 7 in 10 of the top 20% earning households. But actually for many of those high earners, a moderate retirement income, as defined by the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association, would be a significant drop in standard of living compared to what they're accustomed to. We can also look at the geographical impact as well. So those in the East Midlands, they fare worse. So 37% are on track to achieve a moderate income, and the Southeast come out on top with about 51%. So urgent action really is needed to close the retirement expectations versus reality gap. And even prior to the cost of living crisis, there has been a tendency for people to prioritise immediate needs at the expense of future needs. So education will enable people to understand those long-term implications of decisions they make when building their pension pots. Next slide, please. So guidance is needed both during the accumulation and decumulation phase, because the size of pension pot ultimately will influence retirement choices. So the bigger the pot, typically the better the retirement, because the more options an individual will have. So the earlier the education, the better, because the decisions people make in the accumulation phase will impact that outcome. So most obviously, size of pot can determine the age at which it may be possible for someone to retire. And a smaller pot does mean there is a higher risk of running out of money and will restrict the age at which retirement is possible. Pot size can also limit flexibility. So for a member to consider drawdown as the main method of income, experts will typically suggest that you need a minimum pot value of £200,000 to £250,000, because you need a certain amount of capital to ensure you can maintain the growth whilst being able to draw income over a long period of time. Next slide, please, Katie. Some modern pensions do mean that individuals are increasingly in control of their own futures. We don't expect people to know how to build a house. So why do we expect people to know how to build up their pension and therefore their retirement plan? So this slide is pretty busy, so bear with me and I'll talk you through it as best I can. But what it is essentially telling us is that there are lots of different levers that you can pull to impact pension value. If we take an individual with a salary of £30,000, they've been contributing 10% from age 22 to 68, and they achieve a 5% return on investment, so we're following the dotted black line, then that would result in an annual income of around £12,500. However, if they contributed 20%, still achieved 5% growth, they could achieve potentially £25,000 a year. And alternatively, if contributions remained at 10%, but they achieved 8% investment return, then actually they could achieve an annual income of £28,000. So evidence does suggest that the two factors which have the greatest impact on an individual's pension and therefore retirement income is how much they contribute and what level of investment return they achieve. And the good news is that it's these two areas that individuals have the greatest degree of control and influence over. So one of the most simple things that financial education can do is help people understand what level of contribution is required to achieve what they define as a desirable retirement. And it gives them a tangible figure for them to work with. There's been countless times where I've run through a pension projection tool with a client who, on seeing the total pot value, has asked if that's the annual figure. So people do have unrealistic expectations as to what their contributions will deliver. And investments play a hugely important role for medium to long-term savings due to the hidden risk of inflation. So just 1 in 3 people actually know that their pension is invested. So it's unsurprising that we do find that investments are the most overlooked area when it comes to pension planning, but they can make our money work harder. And that's particularly with the help of compound growth over the long term, which is where you can earn returns on your past returns. So greater education is needed around the nature of investing and the relationship between risk and reward, because that will have profound effects on people's retirement prospects. So boosting awareness of these 2 drivers could particularly improve the outcomes in retirement for women. A gender pension gap does exist, with women typically retiring with a pension of around 1/3 of their male equivalents. So education and forward planning could help to bridge that gap, because being forewarned enables them to be forearmed. Next slide, please. So as employers, you are perfectly positioned to provide financial wellbeing support and signpost guidance. Life is busy, so making it as easy as possible for people to engage with their pension really does make a difference. So I thought I'd use this opportunity to share some of the insight from one-to-one meetings that our financial wellbeing team have with our pension members. So some of the retirement myths that we find ourselves busting. Many are unaware that pensions can be used as inheritance tax vehicles, as they're considered outside of an individual's estate, which often means that pensions should be the last money spent. If a member dies before 75, it is possible that that money could pass over tax-free to their beneficiaries. Another common misconception is that the tax-free cash has to be taken all in one go. That isn't the case. Actually, you can take it in dribs and drabs, which could mean that people can end up taking a higher sum tax-free if they do that over a longer period of time, though that is entirely dependent on stock market movement. So we would want to try and avoid members taking out the full 25% tax-free cash simply because they can, because if they have no need for it and they pass away without spending it with a percentage left in their bank account, then that will fall liable to inheritance tax, whereas in the pension, it doesn't. It's those sort of quirks that need to be signposted with members, so all of that information provided up front, detailing the considerations, laying out the consequences of each option, so they can be confident making their own informed decision, because those decisions that they make cannot be undone. Survival pessimism is also a trend that exists, whereby we typically underestimate our life expectancy. People typically gauge it on their parents, but the reality is that each generation is actually living longer. So by 2045, the average life expectancy will be close to 90. And although we're living longer, retirement ages haven't really changed. So individuals really do need to do all they can to build their pot and to ensure that that money lasts them. Building a pot can be a little more challenging for those late to the party, but it is actually never too late to get saving. There is always options, and any money put away will help members boost their income in retirement, because that tax relief will help build that pot quicker. And turning age 50, members still have 180 paydays before 65. Next slide, please. So circling back to the statistic that we saw at the beginning, just 4 in 10 are on track to achieve a moderate standard of living in retirement, as the majority of the nation are sleepwalking into retirement. So ideally, people do need to be considering their preferred withdrawal mechanism at least 10 years out from their preferred retirement age, because their selection will likely inform their investment strategy and risk appetite during those years. Because, for example, a person considering drawdown may still have 35 years or more in the stock market compared to a person that's selecting an annuity. Retirement is a time of considerable change, and the amount of information available can be overwhelming. So with more freedoms came more options, more complexities, and more risks. So it can lead to a bit of decision paralysis. Plus, there's the added complication that retirement planning is hugely personal. Everyone's circumstances and priorities do differ, so there isn't necessarily a blueprint for people to follow. So in my experience, people typically put off retirement planning for 2 main reasons: a lack of understanding and fear that it's too late and won't be enough to retire on. So they do tend to bury their heads in the sand. Financial education and guidance services can remove those fears by providing the information needed through positive messaging that is jargon-free. So PensionWise was established to provide guidance to members in direct response to the pension freedoms, and that offers a free appointment to those over the age of 50 to discuss the decumulation details in detail. So people will benefit from receiving information on all of the withdrawal options, how they can be mixed and matched to suit your income needs, clarification how one decision can then impact future choices. For example, if they were to take an UF plus payment while still employed, the fact that that would enforce the money purchase annual allowance, which will then restrict how much they can pay into their pension moving forwards, which would be a significant hindrance if they're still in the phase of building their pension. So as defined benefits disappear, exercising choice with a pension will be the new normal. And employers in the industry do need to play an active role in supporting savers. Without sounding dramatic, these decisions that people make will impact for the rest of their life and potentially that of their family too. And with that, I will pass back to Katie.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. It was really, really interesting to hear how the impact financial education can have on employees. And I guess it's never too early to start educating members during the accumulation to help with their retirement outcomes. So thank you very much. Last but not least, I'll hand over to Helen to carry on with the webinar. Helen.
Thank you very much, Katie. So obviously we've had some great overviews here of the challenges that employees are facing at the moment, the role the financial education can play in helping them. And I'm here to talk about the challenges facing people coming up to retirement and how employers can help. So if we go to the next slide. Thank you. So if we think of the years going up to retirement, they're peppered with several key decisions. So obviously there's the big one there, how much do I need in retirement and am I on track? As well as other ones around when should you retire? Do I need to delay? Can I phase into retirement rather than retiring on one day? And then we have the very complex matter of how to take a retirement income. Now, prior to freedom and choice, the vast majority of people retired, took an annuity, and that was it for a lot of people. Whereas freedom and choice has brought in quite a lot of choice, and with that extra choice comes complexity. So someone might choose an annuity, they might choose to remain invested in the market through income drawdown, they might choose to take a pension as cash, they might choose a mixture of all of these things. So it's clearly very, very complicated. Next slide, please. And I felt this challenge was really well encapsulated by a very well-known pension journalist that I saw posting on Twitter. Now, her quote was, "Pension freedoms are overrated. Turns out saving was the easy part. Trying to plan how to spend my pensions, cash, balancing all the different factors is making my head hurt." She stomps off ranting about the demise of final salary schemes. Now, this is a very, very real challenge because with final salary schemes, people had a level of certainty, didn't they? There was a promise that, they would get an income in retirement based on their final salary and how long they'd worked with their employer. So people didn't have to do an awful lot around that. Then we also think of the key driver of auto enrollment success has been inertia. And then as they come closer to retirement, they are being given quite a lot of big decisions that, as Claire has mentioned there, can have a major impact on people's entire retirement. So there's clearly an information vacuum there that needs to be filled. Next slide, please. So again, I've talked about the challenges of navigating freedom and choice, but if we look at the current environment, things are more complicated again. So, we've got this ongoing political uncertainty around the state pension triple lock. Is it staying? Is it going? There's been a lot of, it's a real political hot potato because, a lot of people are very reliant on the state pension and they didn't get a particularly great increase last year. As Sarah mentioned earlier on in her presentation, people are struggling right now and they're really, a lot of people really banking on a decent inflation linked increase next year. But as yet, we're not sure if that's going to happen. We've then got the market uncertainty that we've had in recent months. That obviously impacts pension savers trying to build up their pension, but also those people in income drawdown who are trying to manage a pot that they're taking income from in what could be a falling market. So that's quite challenging. Added to that, we've got inflation on the rise. Now, this not only impacts how much you can save into your pension, but also it means that you need probably more income when you get to retirement because you've got higher costs. And I think that pensioners are very, very badly exposed to the huge increases that Sarah outlined, in energy and food, because pensioners tend to spend a higher proportion of their bills on the very things that are rising the most. So there's some real current challenges that are really complicating matters. Next slide. If we look a little bit closer at, what's going on with investment, and for people that are maybe coming to retirement managing an income drawdown portfolio that they don't maybe have that much experience of doing. We've seen volatility in the FTSE. You're just recovering after the pandemic. We've got the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We've got the mini budget bond meltdown that we saw. We've got the political uncertainty. And actually in recent weeks, I've been asked by many people, is my pension safe? There is a lot of concern there. And, I say particularly if somebody doesn't have that much experience of managing an income drawdown portfolio, that could be quite challenging. And, are they in a position where they can, so for instance, at HL, we've got income drawdown tools that can help people manage their drawdown portfolios. There's also provision of financial advice if people need it. There's these big voids that need to be filled. If we could move on to the next slide. So the other key retirement income option that we have, and it has been the bright spot amid a very, very gloomy overview, I must say, and this is the annuity market. Now, prior to Freedom and Choice, annuities were the premier retirement income product. Now, for those that don't know, with an annuity, it's an insurance product. Basically, you hand over your pension to an insurance company, and then they agree to pay you an income for the rest of your life. Now, people turned their back on them after Freedom and Choice because they felt that the incomes available from them weren't very good. They didn't like the lack of flexibility. So a lot of people went into drawdown. Now, what we have actually seen this year is the income on annuities actually growing a lot. They've grown by over 40% this year alone. So we could see a lot more people looking at annuities to form, part of their retirement income or all of it. Again, like as part of our service, we do deliver like nudges around, shopping around the annuity market, because there are several providers out there, and the incomes available depending on the provider and the type of annuity, can make a big difference to somebody's income. So it's making sure that people, not just say, I'll buy an annuity, but making sure that they are navigating the market to get the best deal. Next slide. And again, over and above, freedom and choice, the current investment challenges, as Claire mentioned earlier on, everyone's circumstances are different. If you're married, single or divorced, that's going to have an impact on your financial resilience and how much you've put away. Are your children still at home? Do you have other assets? Are you expecting an inheritance? Another big one, actually, will you have paid off your mortgage by the time you come to retire? And we're increasingly seeing people either still paying off a mortgage into retirement or renting through retirement, and that's going to have a massive impact on your retirement planning. Next slide. So amid this huge, complicated, field that people have to navigate, there's a real information overload here. And so where can people go to get the right information? And the thing is that there is information everywhere, but it's trying to find out what is the right information and making sure that you trust where that information is coming from. So we've got Pension Wise, which I think Claire mentioned, really, really good guidance service for people. We've got the national press, we've got pension providers, you've got these, Instagram influencers, and then you've got family and friends. Now, you could be getting, different information from all of these people. Some of it could be right, some of it could be wrong. So it's very confusing. Who do people trust to help build their retirement resilience? Next slide, please. So I found some recent research from Royal London, and it looked at who people trusted to give them good information in retirement. Now, 68% of employees trust their employer. Now, only family, friends and the bank are more trusted. Now, when it came to looking for the best source of guidance for their pension, 23% of employees again considered their employer to be the best place to go to get this information. Again, second only to family and friends and professional advice. So it's very clear that there's a really strong bond here that people feel towards the employer. They save into a pension through the workplace. There's a role there for people to build on that and to build their financial resilience and to be fed through good key bits of information as and when they need them, so that they can not just accumulate a pension but retire well when the time comes, and hopefully at a time of their choosing. Next slide. So what kind of things are available that can really make an impact on people? And I think one of the key things is online tools. And I've got an example here of our pension tool. And, I think these are really, really invaluable. You can put in your pension value and it can tell you how much that income might get you. I think Claire mentioned that often people see their statements and they could have £100,000 worth of pension. They think that's their annual income. They've got no idea to what these different figures equate to. These calculators are so useful for people. What kind of income are you shooting for? Is it enough? They might bring in the state pension, which a lot of people kind of forget about as part of, they don't realise how much it is. But also the impact of increasing, decreasing contributions. What happens if you delay retirement for a couple of years? It can be a real kind of eye-opener in the years running up to retirement, to say, well, am I where I need to be, and what can I do about it? Because people can be quite surprised with quite small amendments to their contributions. They can make a real difference. I've obviously highlighted the pension calculator, but we've got things like annuity income calculators as well, to help you compare different incomes from different providers. There's drawdown calculators as well. These can really, really help people really open their eyes to what they have for retirement. Next slide. Other kind of key messages that I think would be really helpful delivered through the workplace. So one of the issues that a lot of people face is around lost pension pots. Now, I think there's some very oft quoted figure from the ABI saying the average person will have 11 different jobs throughout their career. Now, you could have a pension in every single one of those. And as you move jobs or move house, you risk losing contact with those old pension pots. Now, I've put a link here to some recent research from the PPI. The total value estimated of lost pension pots, £26.6 billion. That is a lot of money. The average is around 9,400. There's some quite life-changing amounts of money washing around the system that could have a huge impact on people's retirement planning, and they just don't know about it. So it's how can we help engage people with those? If we move on to the next slide. So we have a government pension tracing service, and that can help people. But the issue is, you need the name of your employer and your pension provider, and they'll help you with contact details. Now, this is a great service, but not enough people know about it. I think only about there may be 230,000 calls have been put to the pension tracing service in the last 5 years or so. Now we're talking here, there's 26 odd billion pounds washing around the market. Now, people don't know about this service. Now, one of the biggest things an employer could do to help their employees is to kind of maybe prod them at the age of 50 and say, do you possibly have some lost pension pots? Here's a pension tracing service. See what you can do. It could be the best couple of hours you've ever spent. You could find yourself wealthier by several £1,000s. Next slide. And again, on top of all of that, there is the more tailored support. So, there's providers that we can offer webinars, other information about specific topics. So, I mentioned there about the state pension. Myself and Claire recently did a webinar on the state pension, and we were inundated with questions about it. If you can put that in front of the employee, you could get a lot of interest there, because people have a lot of questions. Pension consolidation. So once you've delivered that prod to help people find those pensions, maybe if you help them to consolidate them, that gives them a really, really good overview of their retirement planning position. What are the pros and cons of the different retirement income options? I mentioned earlier on, it's a very, very difficult maze to navigate. Any help there could be really helpful. And, also the ability to provide access to regulated financial advice if the employee feels they need it. So I do kind of feel that people, they want help and they want support, but it can be quite difficult because it needs to be put somewhere where people are regularly. And I think this is why I think employers are very, very well placed to deliver this kind of guidance, because you're at work every day, rather than someone having to find contact details for different services and going and finding them. The employer could be a key kind of portal to helping people get this information. Next slide, please. Oh, and I believe that I am now passing on to Claire, aren't I, just to give us a little bit of an overview.
Yes, thank you. So how exactly can HL's retirement service help your members? So from your members' perspective, the retirement service will come in several different forms. So we use various mediums of communication to ensure that there is something for everyone. So we're poised, ready to turn member interest into engagement. So I do really want to stress that this service is entirely free. Members can engage with us as much as they would like to. There's no obligation to take up our products or services. The thinking is very much aligned to our barometer and financial resilience work. So it's grounded in the fact that we believe that we have the responsibility to share our expertise with a wide community of savers and investors to help them improve their financial futures and their retirement outcomes. So the service includes one-to-one appointments with a retirement expert, and that's the opportunity to discuss retirement options at length. And we just heard how invaluable that can be, given all of the complexities and how it can be so different dependent on an individual's personal circumstances. So in the first 8 months of this year, our experts spoke to around 1,650 members. So one part of that service might be being able to speak to someone at the point of purchasing an annuity, which can make member money work harder. So the vast majority of the annuity market is actually execution only, and a lack of understanding of all of the options and guarantees that can be built in can often result in clients missing out. So as an example, it's pretty common for people to shave off units when asked about their alcohol consumption, going through health questionnaires, falling into that habit when we're asked at the doctors and shaving a few off. But actually, it's really important that clients are entirely transparent, because actually those small differences, particularly around alcohol and smoking, can make a big difference when it comes to the annuity interest rate. And our experts will take the time to explain that through the process, ensuring that members get the best deal, whether that be facilitated through us or whether it ends up being elsewhere. We host regular dedicated retirement webinars, and they are always recorded and available for members to watch on demand. And as evidenced by 5 to Thrive, we think it's really important that people view their financial resilience holistically. So on top of the retirement focus sessions, this year we've actually begun inviting our retirement service clients to attend 3 to 4 financial wellbeing webinars a year. So the content range is really broad, and it's designed to be topical, so really explaining what's going on in the wider economy and just how that impacts people's personal finances. I think given all of the headlines, people do have a lot more questions, and they are engaging with their money more because of all the additional complexities. So in September, the wellbeing webinar that we offered was how to navigate the cost of living crisis. And just to give you a bit of a flavour of what that explored, we looked at the causes of the cost of living crisis. We also looked at the economist terminology that people are hearing being banded around in the news, impact of inflation, rising interest rates, what that means, and how people can cut costs. So the webinars are regularly hosted by HL's subject matter experts. So both Helen and Sarah have been involved in them. So Helen helped out with our Understanding the Gender Pension Gap session, and that was held in March to coincide with International Women's Week. And also we've had one of our senior financial advisors host the in-depth lifetime allowance session, and that was back in April. We do want to make it as easy as possible for you to share with your members. So we create the communication. You can see a snippet of an example on the slide. That can then be forwarded straight on to your members by email. It's entirely up to you whether you decide to promote that with people only aged 50 and above, or whether you can choose to widen the exposure and extend the invite to all staff dependent on the topic. So some of our current clients have chosen to host the link on their intranets or even host the recordings afterwards, seeing the value in those for all members regardless of age. So with that, I will hand back to Katie.
Thank you, Claire. And yeah, just a brief also thank you to Helen as well. Your topic was really, really insightful. And I guess for the audience today, it really shows how much you can help your members when there are so many choices and decisions to make during their retirement journey. I really hope you found the content useful. I can see there are a few questions that have come in, so we'll get started on them. Please do add any more questions in if you've got some. So just open up the question box. Okay, so the first one is, how can we help our employees to understand the importance of continuing with their pension contributions during a time where every penny counts? Sarah, if that's okay, I'll field that one to you.
Yes, of course. So, I mean, I think that one of the first things to say is that, it sounds odd, someone who talks about pensions a lot, but for some people, the right option will be for a period of time to cut back on their pension contributions. If they're at risk of not being able to pay their rent or not being able to, pay for their electricity and being cut off, then actually there are times when people can't be paying into their pension for a period of time. I think the aim really is to inform people to make sure that they're making that decision fully understanding the implications. So making sure they understand that they're losing their employer contribution, that they're losing the top up, and that it will have an effect on their, over the long term. And also really talking to people about, once you make that decision to cut back on pension contributions or to stop them, actually making sure they revisit it so they know that they will come back to it and think, can I now afford it? At what point will my circumstances change? And then I can get back into the pension. Because the difference between sort of taking, a few months off and a few years off will make an absolutely huge difference to people's retirement income. And they really need to understand that before they get into it.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, the next question. Claire, I'll direct this to you if that's okay. What's stopping our younger workers from engaging with their pension?
I think there are a few factors. The first probably being that when you're young, retirement seems a really long way off. Auto enrolment has definitely helped to get young people enrolled into their pension and start contributing. But I think when you're younger, potentially on a lower salary, you've also got your money spread across lots of different aspects. So you've probably experiencing rent or perhaps your first mortgage. You've then got to juggle utilities, food, socializing, and there's going to be competing interests. And we need to face it. There's always going to be something more exciting to spend our money on than pensions. So what we really need to do is educate around the implications of actually the earlier you start paying into your pension, the better. And that's because you're giving your money a longer opportunity to grow, but also compound growth can really help your money work harder. And the longer the time scale, the greater the potential effects. And also I think that the challenges for us as an industry also to use engaging methods of education. So trying it across different medias, using digitalization, innovative technology, but hopefully also topics like ESG and sustainable investing will also encourage our younger members to get involved with their pensions.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. A couple more questions we've got here. Helen, I'll direct this one to you if that's okay. What's the best way to increase member engagement so they're not making rushed decisions at retirement?
I think the real key to that is to start it early. I think one of the real bonuses of the introductions of pension freedom and choice was that it did engage people with their pensions. I know it sounds strange, but the amount of times I heard people talking about their pensions on the train in the year after that was announced was untrue, because all of a sudden people felt like it was theirs, their pension money was theirs. There is an interest in there. It's just that people don't know where to go to get the information and the guidance that they need. And it's very, very interesting because obviously, I've worked in pensions for many years. Prior to freedom and choice, I told people what I did they backed away as quickly as they could. Since freedom and choice, the amount of people that come to me and they've got questions about their pensions, they know something needs to be done with it, but they don't quite know what, and they don't know where to go. So I think as the employer, if you can start early and keep dripping through that information, you can really, really make a difference to your employees rather.
Thank you. Sarah, I think I'll direct this one to you. Taking into account current market volatility and interest rates, would I be better off paying my pension contributions into a savings account in the short term?
Well, this is one of the things that we come up against a lot. So we have there's a big question really of how people view investments and how people view their savings. So there is a big risk involved in savings that we completely overlook generally. And that is the risk that it gets overtaken by inflation. So it gets eroded by inflation, which is why savings is a short-term measure, because you're sort of protected. But once you hold it over a longer period of time, it then means you tend to lose money after inflation. Whereas when you're sort of looking at things like pensions and looking at retirement investments, then that's a much longer period. So over the longer period, then you've got a much better chance of keeping pace with inflation with investments than you would with savings accounts. So we say, once you're looking to the long term, then you need to start thinking about investment, because that's what's going to give you your growth. And I know you'll have seen that chart that Claire put up, the incredibly complicated one, but looking at the fact that if you actually shrink down the amount of growth that you're expecting from your pension contributions, then actually it will have a huge impact on your potential for growth over the long term. And it might mean you end up having to pay more in. So for everybody, the balance of risk is going to be different, but it's really important to remember all the risks that are involved, not just think about the risks that are right at the top of the headlines about, oh my goodness, look at what's happening to bonds today, but actually also looking over the long term. Actually, if I was to put my money in savings, I would actually end up losing value after inflation.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And we've got time just for one more question. Helen, if you start on this, and then if you need to pass to Claire, that's absolutely fine. The question here, you say you need £250,000 needed for a moderate retirement. How does that reduce if a member has a DB pension, say £5,000 per annum?
So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Claire, I think in your presentation you mentioned the PLSA retirement income standards for a moderate retirement, and that wasn't, I don't think they mentioned 250,000, it was around 21,000 a year, wasn't it, Claire? So I think, as you say, if you put it as that annual income for a moderate retirement, they're saying you need around 21,000 per year.
That was right. Yeah, the 250,000 related to the size of pot that you might need to consider using drawdown as the main withdrawal option. Yeah. And that's because if you're going to be drawing down an income of, and experts will suggest a natural yield of around 4 to 5%, if you've got a retirement period that could be 30 years plus, you need to have a pot big enough to maintain a capital element, so you can ensure there's an element of growth each year to enable you to be able to withdraw an income from it throughout the term of your retirement. So whether you've got a defined benefit of £5,000 a year, the question is really what size of income do you need to be able to maintain your current expenditure and your standard of living? It might be worth having a look at our drawdown calculator online, so inputting a pension pot, and you can see how long, if you were drawing a certain amount, how long that would last. And then you could obviously bear in mind that you'd have that £5,000 income to top up the drawdown income over the term of your retirement. You can see how long that would last, dependent on your own expectations in retirement.
And can I say, with the 21,000 from the PLSA, that also includes state pension as well, which is over £9,000. So always be sure to factor things like that in as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, both of you. We're coming up to 10:30, so I think we'll close there. Thank you very much for everyone who attended today, and to all of the speakers, and also for the questions. We really hope you've enjoyed it. A favour, when you sign out of the webinar today, there'll be a survey, just a couple of questions. We'd really appreciate if you could fill that in for us. We've also got some follow-up material that we'll send over to you over the next few days. Of course, if you've got any questions for us or the speakers, the email addresses of the speakers are on the screen now, or feel free to contact myself. But yeah, once again, thank you ever so much, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.